Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is a great pleasure to wish all of you welcome. My name is Chris Lubkeman. I have the privilege of leading the Strategic Foresight Hub within the Office of the President at the ETH here in Zurich. We are having a conversation today with Professor Elliot Ash, also of the ETH in Zurich. And before I let Elliot introduce himself, I'd like everyone to know this is a collaboration which we have started this year between the AI Center, the new research center here at the ETH, and the Strategic Foresight Hub. As part of three conversations or three moments, three interactions, which we have collectively designed. The first one we're calling a spotlight, in which our guest today already went kind of more deeply into his research now, and you can find that online. And then there's followed by a lab, which is a open dialogue between the members of the AI Center and invited guests to go a bit broader into the topic. And today we're having a dialogue, which will be a meandering conversation between the two of us as we explore some of the issues which came out in the lab. Now, you are very welcome to share questions with us through the chat, and I will do my very, very, very best to integrate those into our conversation, but I do not promise that we will get to every single one of them, but we will do our very, very best. So with that, Elliot, welcome. It's really great to meet you here online.
Thank you, Chris.
And so just tell me, just who are you? What do you do?
Sure, thank you. And thanks for having me. Thanks everyone for joining today. My name is Elliot Ash. I'm assistant professor of law, economics, and data science at the ETH Zurich. I'm from the US originally. I grew up in Texas outside of Houston. I spent grad school and law school at Columbia in New York City. I did a postdoc for a year at Princeton, then at the University of Warwick, but made it partway to Europe. And then now I've been at the ETH for almost 3 years. It'll be 3 years later in the summer. Today, we're going to be talking about AI and law and data science.
Yep.
And I hope that we get to the parts of the discipline where economics also comes in. Law and data science are both about decision making. And so economics is about the influences and consequences of decision making at a social level. And so I hope that we'll be able to discuss how these three disciplines have a lot to talk to each other about.
So that's law, economics, and decision making.
Law, economics, and data science.
Law, okay,
is my title. And I know that's a mouthful, but at ETH we have this freedom to explore these new interdisciplinary areas. I hope that we'll be able to talk about. There's an exciting area of research at this intersection.
That's fantastic. So tell us just, what are you researching?
Sure. So our research uses tools from economics, theories of decision-making and incentives. It also uses statistical tools from econometrics and data science. Those include machine learning and natural language processing to get at research questions in the law and in politics. So you think about the law as a set of incentives that reshape our society. There's a complicated process of legislation and lawmakers contributing to the production of those laws. They're also responding to many social, political, economic, and cultural forces. So we're interested in that process of how laws are developed by lawmakers, how they're enforced by judges, and then at the end, how people respond to them. So you can imagine that when the expected penalty for committing crimes changes, then people who are thinking about breaking the law, they're going to think about that, respond to that incentive, and maybe commit crimes less.
So it's just how laws are made, how judgments are made, right? That's two very, very interesting ends of the spectrum, if you will, which are intertwined quite briefly or quite intimately. One thing that I know many of us around the world share is a frustration with many laws. And sometimes it seems like some laws are very archaic and the system just can't seem to keep up
Sure. Yeah.
with change.
Yes, I think this is an interesting issue, and I think points to the need for the new data science machinery. Tools from artificial intelligence are needed to really read these laws. So if you think about even like in a given cantonal government or a state government, there's going to be thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of pages of statutes potentially. Those are then interpreted by regulatory agencies and the governor or cantonal governments. There are cases that arise under these statutes, and then judges decide them. They write additional opinions, and so we're talking about millions, tens of millions of pages of documents. There's really no way that any individual human can read all of these and understand them. So if we want to understand these laws and their impact on a quantitative level, to look at their broader impact, then we need to bring in data science tools to have computers read these laws rather than humans.
Mm-hmm. And so when you say computers reading the laws, many times we've heard recently there have been the situations where one accuses the reading of being prejudiced and how the reading has been interpreted.
Yes.
Because humans are prejudiced. We're all prejudiced. It's just how we recognize those and how we deal with those. With your work, are you also seeing the prejudice, and can we get rid of that?
Yes, I think that's a good question, and I think that we can all think of examples where language is open to interpretation, and we can see examples of the use of stereotypes in language, for example. So we can all think of examples, but if we want to understand the use of stereotypes more generally and their quantitative impact, we need to be able to have computers read large corpora and count their use. So as part of the research in our group, we've had machines use geometric representations of language, which analyze, for example, the use of gender and the use of different occupational stereotypes. So, I think that we can all think of times where you were reading, not necessarily a judicial opinion, but reading like a newspaper article, and there was some implicit or explicit, representation of women, for example, with nurses, and men with doctors, or men being associated with business or a corporation, and women being associated with the home and family. And I think that one issue that we face as a society in trying to reduce these stereotypes is trying to measure their presence or their frequency in a broader sense, like quantitatively over time and across different contexts. And so we can actually do that in the case of judges by reading their opinions. And it turns out that it's not just reflecting society, in the sense that judges who use more stereotypes in their written opinions, they also make decisions differently. So we can see that when you compare judges who use more stereotypes to their decisions in women's rights cases, for example, gender discrimination, reproductive rights, those judges who use more stereotypes, they also vote more conservatively in those opinions. So they vote against expanding women's rights. So it's consistent with this view that it's not just something in language. It's not just cheap talk. It's really expressing some differences in attitudes or preferences.
And go ahead, sorry.
And one other point about that is it's not just decisions it's not just how they decide their cases, it's also how they treat their colleagues. So those judges who use more gender stereotypes in their written opinions, their written decisions, they also appear to be prejudicial or somewhat discriminatory towards female judges. So if they cite previous decisions by female judges less often, and they're just more likely to disagree with them. So if they're reviewing a case that's written by a female judge rather than a male judge, they're more likely to reverse it.
And so your research proves this.
It's statistically there. So in the sense that you wouldn't have been able to look at this easily, right? Because without these AI techniques that allow you to analyze stereotypes at the judge level or across courts, you could always think of examples like, this is a well-recognized problem, and at least in the U.S. judiciary and other judiciaries as well, is that there's a low female representation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, people were concerned that this was changing how decisions were made and how women judges were treated. But we can actually show that this is true in the aggregate level, on a statistical level.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that means then, can you then start to predict the outcome based on a judge's behavior statistically? Can you predict the potential outcome of a case before you even start going in, based on some of the potential stereotypes that might be present in the room?
Sure, that's a good way to frame it. That this research is pointing towards empirical regularities in across judges and across cases that can actually present an opportunity for data science tools to provide a prediction for how a case will be decided and other outcomes related to the case. Another way that this is used is, which is perhaps more well known, is the use of risk scoring algorithms in criminal court cases,
right,
where you'll have a defendant who's up for bail or for parole or for probation, and there are now quite frequent use of algorithms that provide a prediction about will this defendant commit more crimes in the future? Will they not show up to court? And then judges observe this risk score, which is a kind of probability of whether they should be released or not. And then the judge decides, do I follow this risk score and keep this potentially risky person off the streets? Or do I follow potentially my better judgment? I follow some mitigating circumstances, special circumstances, and let this person go free. So you can immediately see there's going to be some positives and negatives of this system. So it feels like we're kind of giving up some kind of human agency by letting machines decide on these really important issues of justice, and on the other hand, human judges also have limitations and biases, and they make mistakes. And so I think the hope is that to have data science tools that can review many cases and look at the subsequent outcomes, there's an opportunity that human decision-making can be supported or enhanced.
I guess it's a question to what degree the human decisions are augmented or replaced, right? And
yes,
how do you see that?
Yes, that's a great question. So I think that it's easy to think about this in black and white, where there's either no judge, a human judge, or a robot judge, and those are the only three decisions. But I think those are the only three systems. But I think that's oversimplifying things a bit. I mean, we can all imagine cases where conceivably there's no way a robot judge to decide it. So like some moral issue that is like whether we should have the death penalty, right? Like whether how to define freedom of speech, like kind of like these moral issues, and you wouldn't be able to have a robot judge really contribute to that decision. We can have expert judges, or we can have a democratic process to try to decide that. But you can also imagine cases where it's very easy for the robot judge to decide, like a speeding camera. So like somebody is speeding, there's a camera. I mean, like it can say, you were driving 100 miles an hour. You should get a ticket. And I think we will, if we see a car drive past, I think we can all safely say that we'd rather have a speeding camera choose that than a human just guess how fast they were going. So we can easily think of examples where a machine is better, but eventually you kind of like you kind of eventually zero in on these kind of gray areas where this risk scoring issue that I was talking about is one where can you predict whether someone will commit more crimes? You can imagine just putting the machine in charge of that, but the problem is there's a number of problems with it. So one is it can't use like special circumstances or mitigating circumstances. So you can imagine that a defendant if you don't let them out of jail, they might have a family depending on them, or children depending on them. The risk score metric doesn't use that by definition, because it only cares about committing more crimes, whereas judges could use those other factors and balance them against the risk score to make a more informed decision.
So let me ask you a question that is related to the document or the system within which you're talking about. So on one hand, in America, on the other side of the Atlantic, over in the United States, it is a case-based system, and this is not necessarily here, where in the States everything's on precedent, and here it's each case. In Switzerland, each case is taken on its merits at the moment.
Yep. That's an interesting and important issue, and I think that this is definitely going to be very important for the use of machines and decisions. So, it's kind of hard to see from the beginning where under which system machines will be more helpful. On the one hand, in kind of code-based systems like civil law systems, you can imagine that because you always have to go back to the statute, and there's a hope or a concept or an intention that the statute will set specific rules that define every decision. In that case, well, let's just change the statutes into a computer program, and then we can actually just automate everything. The problem is, when you actually get into the real world, there's always new factors coming in, and there's always going to be indeterminate language or matters of interpretation. And so you're going to have some human decide those. I mean, you can imagine that when there's a kind of matter of interpretation, the machine judge could just decide randomly. That would be one approach, but that will strike most people as not very fair.
No.
And so normally you would have human judges come in, make that decision, and then in a case-based decision, a common law system like in the US or the UK, then future judges could rely on that and decide based on it. But at least officially, the judges in Switzerland and the German system countries, they aren't supposed to do that.
Yeah.
But in either case, you can imagine machines coming in to help interpret statutes, to help search through the history of previous judicial decisions. So I was mentioning about kind of a speeding camera would be one place where it would be obvious you'd want a machine to do it. Something that is the next step that's also used all the time now is search engines. So when you're searching for all the relevant statutes, you're searching for the relevant previous judicial decisions. You have Google for legal cases, and you can imagine that becoming more and more sophisticated, where rather than just searching specific words, you could actually kind of ask it questions, and it would find relevant answers.
I want to change completely different question, Elliot, and it's what drove you to do this research?
Sure.
What drives you?
Yeah, that's great. So I have a cute personal answer for that. When I was younger, my nickname for my parents was the sheriff, and because I was kind of obsessed with fairness. That there would be kind of fair allocation of the birthday cake among my siblings and things like that. And even if it was to my detriment, I would want a more equitable outcome to come through. So I think that has always kind of informed my worldview and personality. When I started learning about economics, I thought this approach of policies structuring incentives and humans responding to them, and then that approach also providing an opportunity to improve society through redesigning policies, that was intuitively appealing to me. So I think that this now standard econometric toolkit of designing policies to improve outcomes is just going to be powered up by artificial intelligence, and I think that the ETH AI Center, ETH Zurich, the Center for Law and Economics are well positioned to deliver on that.
Yeah. So if you take a look at where we are today, and where we might be, say, 5 years from now or 10 years from now.
Yes.
Where's the evolution and where's the potential leap?
Yeah. I think this is a really exciting time. So the even 10 years ago, they thought they had solved many of the major problems in machine learning and natural language processing, and they hadn't. Just even like in the last 2 or 3 years, that the technology for machine reading of documents, machine reading comprehension has changed dramatically. It has improved dramatically, where computers are now as good at or better than humans in many language and linguistic tasks, language interpretation tasks, and also, of course, way faster. And so when you think about where we are now in terms of machines reading language, it's not that far off to decisions that are based on language also being either made or supported using artificial intelligence. So, if you think about what judges do in like an appellate court case, the judges, they get briefs from both sides defending justifying their case. Judges read those documents, they read the previous law, and they make a decision. So if humans can do it, I think that it really invites the question of, can machines do it?
Yeah.
The counter answer to that is, well, judges are actually doing more than just reading and deciding. They're adding in their values, they're adding in their personal preferences, how they think society should be, and then using that to complete what's in the text to make a decision. And so I think that we haven't been able to test that yet because the machines for reading documents and making decisions aren't good enough. And so now we're going to see, well, when the machines are as good at humans as reading documents and understanding arguments, we're going to see if what humans are actually adding to this process. Yeah. I think on a whole, so I've been focusing a lot on how judges decide, but I don't think that we should ignore how this will change things for just normal, ordinary people. And so
you read my mind. You read my mind. I don't know how you got that machine learning right there, and boom.
I saw it in your face.
You saw me. There you go.
I think that we care a lot about not just helping judges, helping the elite. We also want to help. We want to democratize the law. We want to democratize legal decision making and legal knowledge. And at the same time, we're going to have judges access to these new tools. Everyone will have access to it. So just how Wikipedia, Google has really democratized information, and I think that we want to imagine Wikipedia style platforms for law that are not just like encyclopedias or dictionaries. They're really semantic question answering systems where you can ask intuitive questions like, can I sue my landlord? Or I got in a car accident. What am I entitled to?
Yeah. What should I do? Yeah.
Right. What should I do? And so these are not easy questions. You can't just look that up, right? And what you need is a system that understands this question and then knows what additional information to collect. Asking additional questions and then kind of following through some semantic search and some decision tree, and eventually leading to yes, you should go forward, or no, this is you aren't entitled to anything at the moment, or seek further human counsel.
So you, in one of your, I think in your spotlight, you talked about you could imagine in a not too distant future, you could have your entire legal office with all the various expertise in your phone.
Yes, I think it's easy. It's easy to imagine in the same way that we have access to all of Wikipedia in our phones. We're going to have access to all, maybe not all, but many relevant legal facts and a lot of legal knowledge at our fingertips in a phone. And so, there are already many dozens of startups and companies trying this, and it's not quite proven yet. I think that it's we're kind of at the beginning of this process of of like legal chat bots, and legal question answering systems, and document analysis systems. Like you can imagine taking a picture of a lease agreement, and your phone reads it and identifies passages that are unusual or passages that you should pay attention to and think about.
Or
And
something's missing. Yeah.
If it's, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, or if you get a new employment contract, many people, even people with legal expertise like me, I have a law degree. I was a practicing attorney. Like I don't want to read that. So you get these long legal sheets. If we could have a machine read them and identify the places where it's unusual, that's going to save you a lot of time.
Yeah. I have someone who's asked a question, which I'm just going to pop to you directly. Do you believe that shallow or deep learning is, but I have to read it here. It's just analyzing in-depth interview scripts. Some researchers also use deep learning algorithms such as recurrent NNs or convolutional NNs for NLP. This is an awful lot of alphabets. I have no clue what the hell they're asking about, but it's okay. I know you do. Do you think this works or functions better for NLP analysis and social science data like interview transcripts? What do you think works best?
I'm reading this.
Okay, you read it.
So this is great. Thank you, Sung, for the question. There's no simple answer to that. I think that all of these NLP tools are already being used in legal document analysis and social science analysis. A topic model like latent Dirichlet allocation, it provides a way to understand the different categories in text. And in terms of doing classification of different, reading a document and saying, is this case valid or not? It's going to be the best systems that are based on those on machine text analysis will eventually be using deep learning methods and neural nets, even if they're not yet.
So I hope that was answered. For those who do this, I'm sure you understood that. I love questions where I have no clue what they're really asking. So this is why I would ask you that. But Elliot, I want to move away from that end. I want to come down to talking about the practice of, because I remember when I had an accountant. And then Macintax was introduced, and I put like half the accountants out of business, I think. Do you see something similar happening in the legal field?
Yes, I think that, again, we're kind of at the beginning of this process, but accounting is a great example where, or like, travel agents, right? Like, there were these decision systems or networking systems that required humans to connect the dots. And it turned out that having machines search over the relevant travel destinations and provide the information is that's much more efficient than having travel agents do it. For accountants, in the case of accounting or taxes, for example, many decisions can be done by spreadsheets or slightly more sophisticated software. Accounting, when it was automated, it doesn't really use machine learning in the way that I've been talking about it. It follows some rules where the software takes inputs and actually kind of hard codes all the decisions.
It's just an algorithm.
Exactly, and outputs the decision. In cases like if speeding, ticket; if not speeding, not ticket. That would be a similar type of solution, like automated speeding tickets. And you can imagine going to the next step would be automatically detecting your license plate. Like if the speeding camera like reads your license plate and then sends you a ticket in the mail, then that's a kind of a rule-based process, but it's using artificial intelligence in the computer vision part of taking a picture of your license plate and extracting that text. And then using that to automate a decision. That's going to have some errors, right? It could be cloudy or dark or something, and so it might not be able to read the license plate. But that's already using artificial intelligence tools to do it. Yeah. In the case of lawyers, it's slightly more sophisticated, right? Because a lot of what lawyers do is, so on the one hand, a lot of what lawyers do is something that machines can do. So searching through cases, trying to find precedents or arguments that support my position or don't. Looking through a judge's previous cases to see, is this judge in favor of plaintiffs or in favor of defendants? That's something that it would take a long time for human lawyers to do. It would take them all day, but a computer with access to the right data could do it instantly.
Right.
And so
but
the
key you just said there was access to the right data.
Yes.
So in this, we're talking, are we talking about really, the clean, tight data? Or we, garbage in, garbage out. You teach somebody garbage, you're going to get garbage. So.
That's great. Yeah, that's a great question. And the short answer is, even if the data has a lot of errors in it, or noise or mistakes, then the machine learning algorithms will work. They will still work in the sense of saving people time. And so if they're right, 90% of the time, you don't want to put them in, you don't want to put a 90% accurate machine in charge of the nuclear codes. But no. but if it's for something that a human lawyer can then take as a signal and then make a decision later, it's good enough, right? So that being said, the data sets are getting better all the time. So going along in parallel with the development of these technologies for analysis of large data sets, including unstructured text, many of these data sets in the legal realm are going online. And so this is something that I think is a really fantastic opportunity where there are these efforts to make legal data open and transparent and democratized. On the other hand, many legal documents, which I think for people who aren't familiar with this, it may be sometimes surprising. Many legal documents, many laws are actually not open domain, and you actually have to.
What do you mean by that?
So in many states, for example, the cases that the courts publish, they go in, those databases of cases are managed by private companies. And so private companies take the cases, they provide a service by editing them and transcribing them and stuff like that. But the problem is they're not available to the public. They then sell them to law firms, sometimes for kind of a lot of money. And this is the case in other countries too. It's not just the US. And so I think that there's something we should be aware of, and we should put policies in place to require that these documents are made available to the public. Yeah.
So I want to we had a little workshop, a little lab last week, and it was really quite interesting. I know you were there as well. Yep. And we had, I think, somewhere 20-30 people all contributing to some thoughts about what the timeline would look like going out to 2050. And it's quite interesting when we take a look at some of those results. I'd like to get some of your commentary on a couple of those, and especially looking out towards 2030, where one said, so there's some thoughts that when in 10 years from now, there will be no more manual drafting of contracts, because the AI will, why would you do that?
Yeah.
Do you?
I'm a little more hesitant to say that. So what I will say is the first draft of the contract will be machine generated. I can get on board with that. But if you think about it, contracts are the classic example of, there's these competing values between, the employer and the employee, between the buyer and the seller. And if the buyer has machine A and the seller has machine B, then they're going to each output contracts that benefit themselves, right? And so this could be efficient in the sense that you immediately see where the disagreement is. Yeah. And so that might save some negotiation time and bargaining time. But in the end, there's going to be this disagreement, and you can't have an algorithm decide who wins. I mean, as I said earlier, you could you could flip a coin, but nobody's going to go for that. And so in the end, there's always going to be this human element of oh, well, I'll give a bit here, you give a bit there, and we'll end up with a contract.
Right. Okay.
And so I think that,
But
that being said, I think that this is going to be an important opportunity for humans to take advantage of machines and which analyze contracts and figure out which clauses really matter to your clients, and use that to help negotiate better contracts.
so could you see, because there's a very interesting dialogue around the black box AI versus an AI which we understand, right?
Yes.
Where you've trained it, and there's already cases we know where we humans don't understand the logic or lack thereof of some of the decisions which this new AI has come up with on its own.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now we sort of believe we understand where a decision comes from.
Yes.
Right? But could we get to the point where a decision might be made where you just kind of look at it and go, I got no idea where this came from?
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is this is a really important issue, and I think it's still like a very open and interesting area. And I think that we're going to see how this plays out. I think that the first point to say is artificial intelligence algorithms, recently developed machine learning algorithms like neural nets, they are black boxy in the sense that they consist of thousands, millions of parameters or neurons, or they're these very sophisticated mathematical equations that would be impossible for a human to read through each item in the neural net and understand what it's doing. So that's something that really cannot be avoided in some sense. That being said, there's a whole really exciting area that's part of kind of this AI fairness or AI explainability technology, where there are these additional kind of model extensions and set of tools for trying to interpret how neural nets work. And so it provides these very nice kind of dossiers on a neural net prediction, where it says, in your case, it looked at the fact that you had this criminal history, in your case, it looked at the fact that you were out of town on this date to make this decision. And so by highlighting the relevant factors, you can provide some information and some trust, because the classic problem would be the explanation of the neural net prediction, it was using your name or your ethnicity or your birth date, right, and things like this. And so you could actually analyze that and say, wow, this algorithm is not deciding fairly. We need to go back to the drawing board and make sure that it doesn't do that. And so I think that also points to potentially some disadvantages with human decision making, right? Because we can all think of examples where human judges, even though they provide some explanation for their decision, they might not be perfectly aware of all the factors that go into their decision. I mean, there's these classic examples of judges responding to the weather, or to recent football games, a football game decision of who win recent football games, or whether they've had lunch, or more seriously, the different gender or ethnicity groups of the defendants, the litigants before them in their cases, and there's a lot of evidence that judges decide inconsistently, or sometimes they decide prejudicially, and we can't really look inside their brains and interpret their decision process. So this is potentially an advantage of AI-driven decision making.
Yeah, and one could also argue our brains are also neural networks, which we don't totally understand either. So
totally
get over it, I guess.
Yeah.
But can you imagine? So one of the things that the lab, the AI plus LegalTech came up with was this idea that potentially, could you imagine a day when an AI sues an AI within the legal profession?
Yeah, that's great. So that's I'll have to kick that to the Q&A. I like that. I like that idea, but I mean, what I can imagine is there are going to be, two law firms representing clients where they're both using a lot of AI tools in supporting their decisions. And so there is going to be kind of an arms race in developing the best software and hardware to do that. And
for sure.
One case where this already comes up is in quantitative trading platforms. So in many hedge funds and financial institutions, they're having algorithms do trading now, and so that actually is algorithms trading against each other and competing for bucks. And so I would be very interested to see that play out in the legal field as well.
That's interesting. It's almost like AI gladiator wars, legal gladiator wars. Like
building a robot gladiator.
An AI legal. That's it. So I want to come back to the question of bias and your work, because you've been working on this for a while now, and I know this is something which is very important to you personally and professionally. And I loved how someone suggested, well, in AI and by 10 years, we'll be able to detect a bias. We'll be able to detect a bias in a judge's decision. Perhaps we can preclude that or sometime, or the bias in a lawyer and how they're working or something.
Yeah.
And we already talked about it once, about some of the data sets, but we saw this with the applications, job applications.
Yeah. That
was proven. Right. Now, do you see within the law embedded bias, not in the decision making, but in the way the laws have been created? I mean, is this anything that you're seeing?
So that resonates. I think this is an important issue. Is the current AI systems are built by humans and they're embedded in a human system that is going to have its own inconsistencies and prejudices and biases and potentially discriminatory treatment to different groups. So if you train an artificial intelligence to replicate those decisions, but faster and more efficiently, then you actually could end up amplifying or replicating or amplifying the biases or issues in the previous system. Mm-hmm. That's something that we really have to be aware of. And I mean, as you said, about in the case of like automated hiring, this is something that has been seen in other contexts. In the case of risk scoring, for example, for deciding whether someone should get bail or not when they've been arrested, the problem is that those models are trained to predict whether someone will be arrested again. Mm-hmm. And so if the police are discriminating against some groups, then that prejudice
it's already embedded.
From the arrest rate is going to be baked into the initial algorithmic prediction, and it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, get it. So if I recall correctly, you were doing some very interesting work in Brazil looking at bribery.
Yes, corruption. Yes, so
which is a different aspect of this, which like a shift gears to.
Sure. Yeah. So that's great. So so far I've been talking about using machine learning to predict how a judge might decide, or predicting how whether a defendant might commit more crimes. It can be used in kind of broader realms of policy support. So one that is globally important is the issue of corruption, where there's recent estimates that there's trillions of dollars of corruption costs per year, where, for example, local politicians, they skim off the top, or they enrich their friends, things like this. So there's bribery problems. And there's this nice setting in Brazil where every year in recent years, they've had these rounds of lotteries audits where they pull out a city, they pull a city's name out of the hat, and then a team of auditors go to that city and skim through the books and try to figure out if there's corruption there or not. And this is really great in reducing corruption. It's a very popular program, but it's also very costly because they have to send in a team of dozens of auditors. They send them there for multiple weeks. It's very expensive to catch corruption. So my research group, we took the data on these audits as well as the publicly available budget data that summarizes the accounts, the revenues and expenditures of these municipalities. And it turns out that this account-based algorithm can predict the presence of corruption based on these audits. So basically, you can imagine the human judged audit will find corruption 100% of the time, but it takes 2 weeks and a team of auditors, whereas a machine can detect corruption 85% of the time instantly. So you can imagine that you don't want to rely just on one or the other system potentially, but as a way to support future auditing decision making, these algorithms can be a big help.
Okay, that's really cool because it brings up kind of again this idea of how we as humans work with these tools, right? And so if you because I was just thinking from in the construction industry, there's always various kinds of exoskeletons, various kinds of AI to help one look at energy, look at sunlight, look at behavior. So there's this whole plethora of augmentation also for decision making.
Yeah.
Do you imagine within the legal world, the legal tech world, AI and legal tech, so it'll also be this plethora, or do you imagine it's going to be this Godzilla of a monster?
Yeah. That's a great question. So historically, the legal tech support systems have been really centralized, and there was only one, at least in the U.S. There's only one of them for a long time, by Thomson Reuters. Then there was one by Lexis, and more recently it's been, there's been a lot more competitors to that. One by Bloomberg, a lot of open source options, and so the recent history of legal tech has been in the democratizing direction. Mm-hmm. And if you also see, even at ETH, we actually, we have a couple of legal tech AI startups. And so, and I think that, because the tools of doing machine learning and deep learning and natural language analysis, those tools are being democratized at the same time that the corpora and the data sets are becoming available to everyone. It really creates the opportunity for a lot of startups coming up, a lot of experimentation. And I think that's really exciting, and I hope that goes forward.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. So how would along with this, this is perhaps a mean question to ask you, Elliot. But it seems like very often the criminal world is, there's a constant battle between the forces, I'll call it, of good and evil. We can leave them. And the whole mission most of the time of the good side is trying to be a half a step ahead of the evil side. Or
half a step behind even.
And it seems like usually they're half a step behind because the incentives on this side are so much higher.
Yes.
So tell me about this a little bit. I mean, within this legal tech, can you imagine a world where it goes down the dark end of that, then all of a sudden you get shut out of your.
Yeah, no, I think that's there's a lot of risks to the use of artificial intelligence technologies in the law, as there would be in other contexts. I mean, we hear about the problems of using AI in employment discrimination, hiring process, and social media, privacy problems. Tracking, identity theft, and I think that a lot of these problems are, or what I should say is, these technologies can both power up the problems and the solutions, and so I'm pretty optimistic about it. I think that eventually it's going to give people more choice and access to more tools and have more control over their lives in the legal process, but it's definitely going to be used by organized crime, by corporations who want to cover their tracks. It's definitely been the history has been that representation and access to resources in the legal world are at least as unequal as those outside of the law.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's reason to be optimistic that these data science tools will fix that, but there's always the risk that they could make it even worse.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that openness to that. And so one of the things that came up in the lab last week also, which I thought was quite intriguing, was the idea that could you imagine where there's a complete rejection of AI induced or AI influenced justice?
Yeah.
Where one says, I understand the flaws of the human. I'm a human. I don't understand where all that's coming from, so I'm not listening to you.
Yeah. I think that those concerns are healthy and well-founded, and I think that if those serve to slow down the adoption of the use of turning over the legal process and legal decision making over to automated tools, I think that's probably a good thing. Mm-hmm. My view is that these technologies are still too experimental, and we wouldn't want important decisions such as think about the asylum process or just like immigration processing, things like that. Those are really labor intensive issues, and you can imagine that there could be a political incentive to throw those over to the algorithm. It'll save us money, and we can just reject everybody. And we could say that the machine chose it, so it's objective. And so I think there's reason to be distrustful of the first settings or the first politicians, let's say, who want to adopt legal AI in a large scale. There could be ulterior motives to doing this rather than just trying to get better decision making or more efficient decision making.
So it's essentially, from your standpoint, I truly don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's really how do we keep the human in the loop?
Yes, precisely. So I think that we especially in the short run, and I think there's never going to be a legal system that can be purely automated, because there's always going to be special circumstances, special factors. The society is changing, cultural values are changing, and we need to, especially in order to build trust, so that a very helpful and healthful AI support for legal decision making can be established. We need to, in the meantime, build in these fairness enhancements and explanation enhancements into the technology.
That's cool. So we've got two final questions for you, Elliot, because our hour has flown by in a heartbeat for me. It's been great. So sure. Is there something I should have asked you that I didn't?
Sure. There were just one couple of points, and we've gone through this a little bit, but just to summarize, I think that I want to end on this somewhat qualified note that I think that there are these risks to using AI and legal tech in legal decision making, especially when we bring it into making judgments or making decisions that will impact many people or impact the democratic society. And so we should keep those in mind. And I think that also is an important invitation for the academic world and nonprofits and other things to contribute to this discussion. On the other hand, we should also be realistic about the current legal process and how it's powered by humans. And we humans are constrained, and they sometimes have biases. And even though we might think of justice as being this purely human concept, I think that there's plenty of reasons to believe that artificial intelligence can support us in seeking justice.
Oh, I thank you for that. And I think this is really important, because my last question is, what should everyone remember from today? And I think you just gave us that to take away. And I really do appreciate, that's really fantastic. What I really appreciate is this is something you spending your life researching, and you're also, I think, a healthy skeptic, right? You're an advocate, and you're also skeptical. You're challenging it at the same time as you're pushing. And I think sure. This is it's a wonderful characteristic to have, and I thank you for that. It's great to see, and for
Very
your
good.
passion. Yeah. So Elliot, thank you so much for making the time to be with us all today.
Thank you.
And I want to thank those who joined us, and thank you for your questions. We didn't get to all of them, and I apologize for that, but I've got most of them in there, and I really truly appreciate it. Now, we do have a networking opportunity where you'll be able to ask Elliot all those questions which you were too shy to ask, or you didn't want me to ask, but you can ask, or you can meet others who are interested in AI and legal tech. And all you need to do is go into the chat and click on the www.wonder.me link, and that will then take you to the networking session, which will start at 17:30, which is about 3 minutes from now, and it will go until you as a community decide you don't want to chat anymore. So with that, I would like to thank the AI Center, Klaus, Fiona from the Strategic Foresight Hub, for helping make this happen today. We look forward to the next one. This is the first in a series, and we're going to be doing this all year long. So if you're interested in AI and X, whatever those topics are, come on back. So with that, we'll see you in the networking world, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.